Hello, welcome back to Story Mantra. I'm Lindsay Preston, and we are back with National Novel Writing Month, and we are thrilled to have Elise Capron with us. And I will throw it to you, Andrew, to do the introduction.
So this could not have been a bigger honor for me, considering what a huge fan I am of the Sandra Dijkstra Literary Agency. You have to understand, this is coming from a teenager back in Hong Kong, who's in Hong Kong, that's where I grew up. I saw Amy Tan's book all over, and I was like, how did Amy Tan, a Chinese national, get published in America and write a story which is so fascinating and the heart of the people I'm surrounded by? And then the Joy Luck Club got made into a movie, and I've read all of Amy Tan's books, and the best book that I love is The Kitchen God's Wife. I cannot get over that story. That is how I learned to write women's fiction. I broke that book apart, and I have it in a Ziploc bag with all my flashcards. Sorry, Elise, but that's the intro I have to give. So we have Elise Capron from the Sandra Dijkstra Literary Agency. She is an agent at the California-based agency for over 40 years ago. That's when the agency started, but Elise has been there for 17 years. She's known for guiding the careers of many best-selling fiction and nonfiction authors, Amy Tan included, Lisa C., Maxine Hong Kingston, Chitra Divakaruni, another fabulous author I love, and many more. Also, I think there's that wonderful fiction, historical fiction author.
Indu Sundaresan? Is that who you're saying?
Yes. I read her entire trilogy, and we visited the Taj Mahal after I read her trilogy.
Oh, that's lovely.
How fascinated I was. On the fiction side, just for all of you who are looking to query, Elise is interested in character-driven literary fiction for the adult market. She aims to work with writers who are getting their work published regularly in magazines and who have a realistic sense of the market and their audience. Before I take up any more time, I'm going to hand it over to you, Sandra. Dijkstra Literary Agency representative, Elise Capron, thank you for joining us and being with us today and helping navigate the unsettling waters of the publishing industry for all of us.
Well, of course, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me be part of this really fun video series. And yeah, I can't wait to talk about it.
All right, Lindsay, kick us off.
Okay, I'm going to start with the question that every aspiring author has. The first and number one question. How do I get an agent?
Oh my goodness. We could spend all day talking about that. But gosh, there are so many ways to get an agent. It's also, the biggest thing is I really do sympathize with writers. Everybody's going through NaNoWriMo right now, like you're really focused on your writing. What do you do at the end of November when you have your finished project? Well, first of all, you don't send it out right away. You work on it and get it polished. But but in terms of finding an agent, I mean, it's a tough world out there. There are so many agents. How do you navigate this big world? How do you find the person who is right for you? Do you need an agent? There's a lot of questions to explore, and it really is about educating yourself as much as possible at the beginning of the process. Number one, to think about the question whether you need an agent or not, which we can talk about in a second. And then number two, to really start trying to identify agents who actually might be a good fit for you, because that's one thing you have to keep in mind through the whole process, is that it's about finding the right match, finding the person who understands your work, not just that one, big agent name or whatever the case may be, but, finding the person who's going to be a good partner on your publishing journey with you and support you in the ways that you need that. And there's all different ways to find those people. There's really wonderful old school ways, like looking at the acknowledgements page of books you might compare to your own, ideally books that have been published in the last few years. There is doing research in places like Publishers Marketplace. There is agent kind of hunting on Twitter. A lot of agents have a big presence on Twitter. But once you start, and about getting recommendations from your other writer friends who have been through the process as well. But whatever you do, when you do that name gathering, you want to be sure to do lots of research and really educate yourself to start pinpointing, again, those agents who might actually share a vision for your work and be on that same path that you are in your publishing journey.
Wow. So where would we say, for an agent and an author's mind to meet, over a manuscript and a submission package? And there's just so many questions I have for you. Elise, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I think, let me ask the first question is, for those who are unsure, what is the role of an agent? And how does a writer know, do I need one? Do I not need one? Or do I go self-published solo?
Sure. So to answer your first question, the role of an agent. So I really think of agents as career managers these days. We represent an author's interest when it comes to anything related to the publication of their book or books and managing their career throughout that process. So our primary function is to sell your book to hopefully the very best publisher for that particular book. And again, this is where it becomes so important that the writer or the agent gets your work so they can really place it at the right house. But we also do lots of important stuff like negotiating your contract, making sure that your book is taken care of throughout the publication process by the publisher. If something goes wrong and your editor is fired or something like that, we make sure that your book continues to be taken care of and has a new in-house advocate within the publishing house. We make sure that the publisher follows up on the promises they made early on when we negotiated that deal. And we basically, we just try our best to protect you and the book when that book comes out into the world. I mean, there are exponentially more books published every year. It's crazy. There is a sea of books published. How do you make yours seen? How do you find your audience? How do you make sure that that book is not buried in that, sea of other books or drown in that sea of other books? And we're there to really try our best to advocate for you and make sure that your book does find its audience and is cared for throughout the process. We also do things like advise you along the way about, essays you might want to be writing, op-eds, like other things we need to be asking the publisher. Again, just kind of keeping an eye on things and keeping all the various balls rolling forward. Some things that an agent does not do, which I think are equally important to keep in mind. Don't expect an agent to be your publicist. That is really in itself an entire other full-time role. Some agencies these days do offer some services like that, but it's not really part of the core role of an agent. So don't go in expecting that. And we're not, excuse me. And while most agents, I would say, are pretty editorially involved, so expect to do revision work with an agent who you sign with, we are not editors. So we should not be relied upon to be the only one giving you all the editorial feedback. That should be coming from elsewhere as well, although you probably will end up getting feedback from an agent. That's just a tiny sampling of the things we do. In terms of thinking about whether or not you need an agent, so this is something I actually love to talk about, because even though I'm coming from the traditional publishing side and the agenting side, I really do believe that the best path for each author and each book is a little bit different. And what's so important starting on this journey, if you're at the beginning of it or in the middle of it or wherever you might be, is really becoming conscious of what that best publishing path for you is. And sometimes that means the traditional publishing path and like working towards trying to get that review in the New York Times and whatever that, what else might come along with that. But sometimes that's not the right way. Sometimes if you are a person who has a really amazing, like built-in loyal readership, or a nonfiction author who's doing tons of events already, and you really understand how to reach your audience, so on and so forth, then maybe a self-publishing or hybrid model is actually a much better path for you. And so I truly believe that the best thing you can do for yourself is educate yourself as much as possible, also understand your own work as much as possible, and really be frank with yourself about what your project really is and where the audience really is, and go into this journey with, as clear perspective as possible so that you can make the best decisions for you. And then you can decide, you know, if is that traditional path the one that is right for my book and the one I really want to go on? And in that case, yes, that means you are going to need an agent. The vast majority of trade publishers are not going to even look at a submission without an agent on board. But if you think another avenue might actually be the one that works for you, then you do not necessarily need an agent. There are also some, I'll just say very briefly, some new models of agenting we're sort of seeing a little bit of, such as like agent-assisted self-publishing and things like that. So those are kind of interesting, kind of new things that are happening too. But yeah, again, going in with clear vision is the best thing you can do for yourself when you decide whether or not you need an agent on board.
Lindsay, do you have a question? Because I have a ton.
Do you want to start? Yes, I do have one, but if you would like to go, be my guest.
What can an agent expect from an author? What are the expectations?
Sure. So well, you know, I guess this gets right to the question of a lot of authors sometimes say, you know, they've worked so hard to get this agent, and what is this agent really going to do for them, right? And I've touched on some of the things an agent does do, but speaking to your question, we are looking for partnerships. So we are absolutely looking for an author who is going to be able to bring certain things to the table as well. And so what could that mean? It could mean a lot of different things depending on the book, but I mean, we want to work with somebody who has lots of cool ideas about ways their book might find its audience, who is an inspired person and an engaged and an energized person who, you know, is excited about writing, you know, essays or op-eds when the book is getting ready to publish, who maybe has a great mailing list already, who is just what it could be all kinds of different things, but I would say generally someone who brings a willingness to make this a team effort and who is going to be that real team player throughout the whole process. I've occasionally, you know, had people who will send projects and then they just think that they, you know, go into a dark closet after they've handed in the book and never show their face again. And I would say, especially in these times, it's really, really hard to do that. You need to be willing to be out there and working all through the you know, the whole process and communicating very clearly with everybody and just being an engaged team member. So yeah, I'm looking for that energy, I think, and somebody who has interesting ideas and is willing to explore them.
Wow. That's a lot. That's, you know, something I would have never ever thought of from the other side. Seriously. Lindsay, what do you have to say?
So that's I think that's the author you're looking for. That's the type of person. What are you looking for when it comes to the actual manuscript? Because obviously when it comes to you, it hasn't gone through extensive developmental edits and line edits. So what are you really looking for in that submission to you?
So for me, it's such a hard thing to quantify exactly, but I will say this. The vast majority of projects I have taken on in my almost 18 years of doing this, I have known I wanted to represent that project within the first 5 pages of the manuscript. It doesn't always have to be perfect the whole way through, right? But there's some, you know, it's just like when you go to the bookstore and you're flipping through books and deciding if you want to buy that book or not, and you read the first couple pages of the first chapter and you get excited or you don't. And I really am honestly just looking for that feeling. Now that said, sometimes I'll read the 400-page manuscript and I will not be as excited by the end and maybe won't sign on, but those ones that I look back that I always have that feeling right away. So for me, when it comes to fiction, I'm looking for writers who are confident in their narrative voice, who are presenting interesting narrative voices or stories I have not heard before, and whose passion really comes through in their work. And I realize that's kind of a tough thing to say because probably every writer feels like that comes through in their work, and it's just that I'm connecting with something, right, unspoken, like, but I would say that is about honing your craft, because I think that confidence in your writing only comes through with honing your craft a lot, practicing, and revising. And also being willing to, I think, experiment with your own work, you know, really getting to know yourself as a writer and take risks. I do think that pays off. In terms of nonfiction, I am looking for stories that cast new light on history. I do a lot of history we thought we knew, and to me that's quite exciting, and I do a lot of that these days, and that kind of thing can kind of be, you know, encapsulated really like in a few paragraphs or in a proposal, and I get excited about that as well. So
Wow. Can I ask the next question? There's so many. How does an agency decide what genre of work they're going to take on? Because sometimes you'll see we deal with all these genres, but we don't do paranormal, or we don't do historical fiction, or we don't do, you know, stories set in such a theme and time. Where does that come from? Is it the collaboration of agents themselves? Is it the agency that speaks up? How do we know?
So in that, it's a great question. So I would say it probably grows naturally out of what the group of agents ends up finding that they're good at over the years, and that sometimes changes. You know, the types of projects I was taking on when I started, my agenting, like, I think journey has really evolved a lot. Like, I never would have guessed I'd be doing certain types of books that I do now, you know, even 10 years ago. So I think it grows naturally out of that. I do think there are certain agencies who have really, you know, crafted a certain identity for themselves. Andrea Brown, you know, they only focus on, you know, YA and children's and those areas, and so they only bring in agents who do those areas, for example. But yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the specialties of each agent in particular, and so those specialties and those focuses also are potentially going to change over time. So that is something you need to pay attention to. And another reason you really need to do your homework on the agencies or agents you're submitting to. You know, you need to make sure that the thing they were known for 20 years ago is still the thing that they're doing now, because that can shift over time.
Right. Does that also change with agents who transition in and out of agencies, new agents who come on board?
So, well, I would say that, I mean, an agent who moves to a new agency, they're probably going to focus on similar areas they were before, because again, it's probably what they've found that they do really well. And as far as a newer agent, you know, oh gosh, I don't know. It could be a lot of different things. Either number one, they're figuring out what they're good at, which is probably built on the type of work they like to read. But sometimes there may be cases which, you know, Lindsay, I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but sometimes there may be cases where like an agency does need someone who focuses on a particular area and maybe try to bring in someone to really fill that hole. I think it could be a variety of cases depending on the agency.
So because we are getting close to the time, I'm going to throw out a question that I know majority of the people watching are writers, but I think there's an interesting journey that happens to writers. And if you become a different part of your career and you want to figure out just a way to make a living as a writer, an agent is an option. How do you become an agent?
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, that's a good question. I will say it's generally can be a long road to becoming an agent. The biggest problem is that if you're seeing it as a way to bring in some money, the biggest problem I think with agenting is it may take the first 3 to 5 years of your agenting career before you actually make any money. This is actually a problem in the industry, which I think needs to change, and I feel kind of passionate about, because I think it has really continued a tradition of kind of old school like publishing that has made it not inclusive, because only certain types of people can afford to become agents and not make a living for a while. So actually, I think this needs to change. I really do. I think the models need to change. I think there needs to be a whole new structuring of how we bring in junior agents, and teach people and mentor them. There is already some work being done in this area, which I think is exciting, but I'm totally getting off course. So to go to your question.
As a writer, I would have never known that.
Yeah, it's hard because I mean, agents, we make a commission on a book that sells. If we don't sell a book, we don't make any money on it, right? Even if we've put in hours and hours and hours of work. But just to actually speak to your question, if you're interested in exploring agenting as a career, I would say the best way is to do things like explore internships or becoming a reader, or shadowing an agent, or even trying to have an informational interview with an agent. We tend to be very like open and like to chat. So that's one way to kind of explore whether or not it would even be something that might be a fit for you and work for you. It is, I mean, books are at the heart of it, and we all are here because we love books, and I love that about this industry, but it's also very much a sales job. So I think it's important to kind of look at the balance and see if that feels like the right sort of thing for you.
And as you said, it is a sales job. And as a writer, we get paid when the book sells. As the agent, you guys get paid when the book sells. What should an author see as a typical commission?
Yeah, so any agent, the standard commission is 15%. And that, again, that is only of what your book earns. You never pay an agent a penny directly out of your pocket for any services. If an agent is asking for any sort of fee, I'm not saying you should run screaming, but I do think, because there may be some valid reasons out there, and I also welcome new models of agenting. I don't think there's just one way, but take a careful look at that agreement with that agent and make sure you understand exactly what that's going towards. But yeah, 15% is typical. If an agent does things as the Dijkstra agency does, such as handle sub rights, so foreign rights, audio rights, stuffed animal rights, things like that, in those cases, we actually do charge 20% because we are working with a co-agent in Italy or wherever. And so we're each taking 10%. So that's the exception to that.
Wow. Well, that answers a great question.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
And we're just about out of time.
Oh,
I know, it goes so fast, doesn't it?
no, this happens every time. Just when we start gelling in, and then I have like a million questions here, and I'm sure all the other writers would. And
But Elise will be back with us next week, so we will continue on. Would you like to leave one tidbit of advice for? Well, you already told us what to do at the end when their novel's done, but how do they know the right time to reach out to you or to somebody?
Oh my gosh. After you have, number one, done a lot of revisions, gotten a lot of feedback from people you trust, and just when you feel like it's the best it can be. I mean, and I don't know exactly what that point is, but you do want to wait till it's polished and ready, and also be prepared in that case to get a lot more feedback along the way and be open to that. Because you're probably going to get to do more revision once you get an agent too.
Oh, if you get one, then you get to do the next step, which was going to
exactly.
I was going to ask the same thing, as an author or writer, how do you know the manuscript is done, ready to go?
Yeah, I think it's just about continuing to get beta reads, and until you really feel good about the feedback and you feel like it's, doesn't need more substantial revision. So yeah, I think it's feedback based.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we will have Elise back next week to finish out National Novel Writing Month. So we will see you then. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you so much, Elise.
Thank you guys. It was fun.